So, welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success stories series of interviews, where we discuss with local business leaders, their backgrounds, their successes, their challenges, and what's really driving them forwards. And this afternoon, I'm delighted to have with us Rob Wolfe, who's founder and managing director at CHY Consultancy. So, firstly, Rob, thank you so much for spending a bit of time with us. And if you'd like to introduce yourself, CHY, what you do, how you help people, that'd be wonderful.
No, thank you, and it's good to be here. So, as you said, I'm Rob Wolfe. I co-founded CHY Consultancy in its original form as construction leads back in 2006. So we're coming up on our 20th year
Well, yep.
anniversary. We do everything in terms of social impact and social value. So, social impact, we design strategies. We work with businesses in both the public, the private, and the third sector, so charities and voluntary organizations, to design strategies, processes, implementation plans to deliver positive societal impacts.
Yep.
We also then handhold clients, customers, projects through that process, implementation in partnership with kind of local organizations, local businesses, local charities. And then for my sins, I'm also been involved in the quantification of social impact. So that's how we measure social value, how we measure the impact that you're
Yep.
having on society in economical, social, and environmental impacts.
Brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, no, it's so. What sort of what makes a great client for you? Whether that's industry type, size, behaviours, culture. What are the sorts of people you love to attract?
So sort of social value grew in the sort of 2006 onwards. It very much grew, led by the public sector, very much grew in the construction in the built environment
Yep,
sector. So
yep.
I would probable about 80%, maybe more, of our clients are still within that built environment sector. So over the last sort of 20 years, it started off with the kind of the contractors, the builders, but then very quickly went into kind of the architects, the design teams, the engineers, the developers themselves. We've also worked with financial institutions on how they
Mhm.
invest in a socially responsible way.
Yep.
So it's really, and as well with the public sector. So we've supported various local authorities over the years all across the country, designing social value strategies, procurement strategies to maximize that social impact that they can have through the purchasing of goods and services. So
Yep.
we work on both sides, and some of our clients are FTSE 100 businesses. Others are small micro businesses and charities. So we really
Brilliant.
do work with the full gamut of client.
It, it's really interesting. I was so pleased we arranged this interview because I remember a couple of years back. I went to an event. I go quite regularly to the event, and it's primarily designed to bring investors in touch with companies and founders looking for investment. That's its purpose. But there's lots of great talks. But I remember going into one talk, and basically one of the guys was basically saying without a clear social responsibility policy and strategy, businesses will become uninvestable. So this wasn't, this was actually front and center of a requirement to make sure that our business is not, is investable too. So I think it's really important that people understand that this, that building a solid strategy with your help can be is really fundamental to business success moving forward.
I think, and it's been what's been really interesting from my personal perspective is because we've been involved in the sort of the world of social value before it was called social value, because we've been involved for so long, we've seen that move initially from the public sector,
Yep.
driving this responsibility or the sort of the social outcomes through the, as I said, through their procurement practices,
Yes.
and then that expanding into planning practice, and then actually the private sector, particularly those developers, whether that's British Land, Landsec, Hammerson, McLaren, those developers, then taking that on board and
Yep.
actually driving it
Yeah.
throughout their supply chain. So what we saw
Brilliant.
in kind of 2015, 2010 to 2015 was actually the private sector taking this forward. And then that's kind of continued to grow and grow. And now, like you say, we see investors, pension investors, big financial firms looking for investments, but they're also wanting to understand the social impact of
Yes.
their investment, not just the financial return on investment,
Yeah.
which is only, but it's only a good thing. But with that comes obviously the challenges of doing it well, doing it properly. How do we measure it? How do we monitor it? How do we, make sure that whatever we've promised, whether that's to an investor or a procurer, how is that delivered?
Yeah.
How is that, is it tangible? Is it meaningful? Does it have a positive impact? And I think that's where sometimes these things can fall down, is that those promises are kind of put in place,
Yes.
but then they're not followed up
Yeah.
by either the client or the person delivering the goods and services.
Yes. I think, yeah, I could really see that. Rob, maybe if we could start just looking backwards a little bit, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into business, and why this particular one for you.
Um, So, I suppose by trade, if you will, I went to art college. I'm a three-dimensional and product designer. But then sort of left university. I was in punk rock bands as a drummer, so that was kind of my main focus in my early 20s.
Brilliant.
But the I sort of started working with what's now called sort of alternative provision or pupil referral units. So working with young people that have been excluded from school. I then sort of took that and started to work with adults, particularly offenders. So I worked at Leeds Prison for 2.5 years, working in the kind of rehabilitation units, looking at how we can improve employability skills, soft skills, confidence, improve their personal well-being. And then from there went to work in a local charity in Leeds called Renew, that was very much looking at kind of grassroots community regeneration.
Right.
And from there, really, the business, which is CHY, kind of grew out of frustration, really. It wasn't just me, it wasn't just Renew. So my chief executive at the time, Steve Williamson, um, we were really looking at how we can challenge and how we can utilize public sector and private sector investment that was coming into Leeds at the time, but yet those pockets, what we call the kind of donut of deprivation that surrounded the city centre, those poorer communities, weren't realizing any of that investment. So there
Right.
was no job creation, there was no skills development, there was no inclusive growth. So, money being spent with local
Yeah.
businesses. And so we got into partnership with Leeds City Council and various others across the private sector to see what we could do about tackling that.
Yeah.
And what we kind of found is that nobody had that responsibility and the accountability to really take that and move it on. So
Yeah.
we were just told, oh, well, you can't put these things in procurement, you can't put them in planning. And, Steve Williamson, as I said, I've a huge amount of respect for him. And he gave me and the group the confidence to say, well, actually, we can change this.
Brilliant.
So in the very short version, that was the long version. The short version is CHY Consultancy, to be honest, was kind of born out of frustration. I could see the help that we were doing at a grassroots level, and I could see the investment coming into the city, and the two didn't match. And I
Right.
wanted to see how we could do that. And that was really what we started in Leeds back in 2006.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So 20 years on, looking back again, there must have been a few challenges on the way. What's some of the biggest issues you've had to overcome?
I think certainly early doors, the austerity, the financial crash in
Yes.
2008, 9,
Eight. Yeah.
and then the sort of the follow on to public. So when we were first founded, it was very much we were supported by public investment.
Yeah.
And biggest challenge was when the austerity came in and the public funds dried up, it was how we pivoted or how we changed to become kind of more private sector driven.
Yeah.
So how would we kind of basically provide consultancy services as part of our income? And that switch between from public sector to private sector was certainly a big challenge at that time.
Yeah.
But we've survived that and many since then. So
Yeah.
we're still here.
Absolutely. I might talk about quotes later on, but there's a lovely quote that we've all survived 100% of the challenges we've had so far. And
Yes.
it's it's a great way of looking back and say, yeah, okay, it's building resilience. It's what we do. And what would you say are the biggest things you've learned about running a successful business?
I think one of the things is first of all defining what success means to
Yes.
you and to the business.
Yep.
So I think, in society we might sort of think of success as turnover or profit or how big your company is, how many staff you employ. Whereas for me, it's really about what we are changing. That's
Yeah.
my measurement of success is,
Brilliant.
are we supporting people to make better decisions informed by not just finance, but as well by social and environmental aspects. And so I think that is one of the things that I've learned is, rather than which I've certainly been guilty of in the past, chasing certain things that
Yep.
don't kind of fit the core culture of the business. And I think defining what you think is success, defining the culture that you want to have as part of that business, I think is really integral. I think the other side of things is I mean, this is something, whether it's speaking to school kids or whether it's speaking to people in business, is say yes. A lot
Yep.
of the opportunities I've had personally and professionally throughout my life so far have been because I've said yes without knowing what's going to happen.
Brilliant.
So if a client has said, is there a way that we could do that? I've always very much gone in with a attitude of, well, yes, we can,
Yep.
and then working out how we can make that happen. And I think that approach has really, helped over the years, and it's helped us develop new products, new innovative ways of learning. All these sorts of things have become where we didn't know the answer when from the outset of a project.
I think it's a really great thing to highlight is if we believe everything's possible, then the question becomes how can I rather than can I? And
Yes.
that totally changes our approach to that issue, if that makes sense. It's not a digital yes or no. It's right, well, how? Let's just work it out. We can do it. And
And
it's
when
interesting. Sorry, go on.
No, no, I was just going to say, and when we started, that was exactly, the local authorities, the public sector at the time said you can't possibly put these requirements into procurement. It's not legally possible. You
Right.
can't put you can't put these into planning
Right.
requirements. Yet now, 20
Yep.
years on, I mean, certainly from 2012 and the legislation around the Social Value Act, and then the updates to it in, that have come on since, they are in bed and it's legislated
Yep.
now. So if our business would have been very short-lived if I had just taken no as the answer at that point. I thought, well,
Yes.
that's not a good enough answer for me. I think we can do it. And then we kind of continued to win people's hearts and minds into how that was possible.
No, that's yeah, a great way of approaching it. And I think going back to your point about success, I think it was Stephen Covey had I love one of his famous quotes, which is there's no point climbing the ladder of success to find you put it up against the wrong wall. And
Yeah.
and I think that it says, oh, let's define what the wall looks like. Let's define what it looks like before we go for it. Rob, I think you're aware we're a business coaching organisation. I'm just keen to know who the best coaches you've worked with, whether that's business, sport, life in general. Who's had the biggest impact on you?
Well, I've mentioned him already. I mean, Steve Williamson, who
Yes.
was chief executive of the regeneration charity Renew, and I was quite young. I was in my early 20s when I worked for Steve, and he he gave me the confidence in myself to challenge things and positively disrupt certain ways of. So he gave me that attitude of, well, if they say no, then what you've got to do is work out, well, how you can change that no to a yes, and you've got to provide them with those solutions. And he really gave me the confidence to do that, and his faith in me gave me the confidence to go out there and do it. And I don't think that I would be where I am, or what was then Construction Leads and is now CHY Consultancy, would exist without Steve Williamson's support and help and coaching
Brilliant.
through those years.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And whether it's from Steve or anyone else, do you have any favourite quotes or sayings that you catch yourself using on a regular basis?
Well, funnily enough, there are two that I use in pretty much every single sort of presentation or talk I do. One of which is very much around the kind of culture of what we do, which is the African philosophy of Ubuntu, which is very simply translated is "I am because we are." And the reason why I use that is it's about understanding when you're making decisions. It's about thinking about the impact, not just on you or your business, but
Yeah.
actually standing back and thinking about the broader impact, whether that's on a local environment, whether that's on society, but just that ability to think about the we and not the I, which I know is quite cliched, but it's a really simple, strong message, I think. And the other one, which is actually reflected by the mural behind me, is a lot of the time with social impact and social value. When I started my career, I was called the Care Bear. I was called the person that did the fluffy stuff because social impact is quite hard to quantify a lot of the
Yes.
time. And therefore, people put it in the too difficult pile.
Right.
And so I'm grinning as I'm saying this, but I do actually end up using the quote from Yoda, which is when he's training Luke, when he says, try not, do or do not, there is no try. And I think the reason why I use that is because rather than putting something in the too difficult pile because you don't have the full answer, just do it. And if
Yeah.
it fails, fail quickly, learn and do it again, but don't just leave it in the to-do pile, because otherwise you'll never learn. You'll never know if it's possible.
Yes.
So, don't try, just do,
Just
I
do.
think is the other thing that that look at.
Love it, and I think that links very closely with the, whatever the question is, say yes, and then work it out, sort of thing, isn't it? Is that positive attitude to anything is absolutely bang on. And similarly, Rob, any favourite books or podcasts you can recommend? Again, whether that's business life in general.
Well, I mean, it's not really. So on the kind of podcast side, I'm slightly obsessed with a wonderful podcast called The Origin, which is called Origin Story, which is two journalists and historians who basically look at the origins of people, words, or
Right.
theories, isms,
Yeah.
and they tackle one thing per episode and really just go into depth about the way it's used, the way that that word is used, or the way that that person has had an impact or a legacy. But they really delve into the origins of that story. So I think a
Yeah.
lot of the time, particularly in business, we can throw around these terms without really actually understanding where they've come from and where they started to be used. So that's a particular favorite of mine. And in terms of books, I'm the recommended to me by my content writer, but it goes in the same vein as this kind of defining your own success, which is a book called Company of One, and it's just looking at basically how you can become better, not bigger. So
Yeah.
becoming bigger is not always the best thing to do, and actually deciding and defining what your success is, rather than being driven just by turnover, profit, and size.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it does make a lot of sense. I think I'm familiar with that book. I'm not, I'm trying to think who recommended it to me, but yeah, absolutely. And it is this whole thing for me is absolutely bang on about what does success look like. Let's not be climbing a ladder for the sake of it. Let's be working at what we really, really want. And it's interesting when, when we work with clients, that's the first thing we do. It's most business plans and business goals are about the business. Whereas we start with the founders and owners and say, look, you're the guys, the founders. What do you really want to achieve? And that's, it could be a range of things, financial, experiential, giving back to community. It is what is it that's your purpose, and let's make the purpose of the business that, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
it
it's not it doesn't make the best business sense, but I've always had the mission since 2006, funnily enough, I've always had the mission, and it's very clear on our website to close because, I believe
yes, I
that,
saw that on your post. Yeah,
yeah, so if people are considering broader values when they're making decisions, if they're taking into consideration their environmental and social impacts as well as their financial, then you shouldn't need a consultant like me.
yeah,
So therefore, success for CHY would be that actually we close our doors because those businesses are operating in that socially and environmentally responsible way.
yeah. Cool. Like really, really like that. And what would you say you've learned about yourself throughout your journey so far, Rob?
Oh gosh. Um, I think that I have uh I don't I that's a very difficult question actually. I think that I've learned a lot about the kind of nuances of a lot of different areas. So sort of whether that's sort of planning, I think I've learned to listen to clients from a broad range of industries, sectors. I think that I've learned I'm actually genuinely, I apologize because I'm actually a little bit stuck with that question.
It's okay. It's okay. It's really interesting. It's yeah, it's okay. I think it's a good question to answer for ourselves, not for this podcast. It's absolutely fine, but it is good to reflect because that enhances the learning, if that makes sense. It's sometimes
Yeah.
reflecting on what we have learned and what we have achieved. I think is really important, I see it in entrepreneurial people often that, especially in terms of achievement, is they're always looking to what to achieve next and
Mm.
don't actually reflect on what they've already achieved into, and reflect on the value of that. So yeah, so it might be something to consider in the future. So one way it might help if I was to ask somebody that you knew really well what they think you've learned, what might they say?
Um, well, I never set out to run a business.
Yeah,
Um, as I said, it was kind of born out of frustration, and I think I've learned to be a business owner. I think I've learned to balance work and home life and various other sort of things going on. I think that I would like to think I've learned how to bring people along with me. I think a lot of what we do at CHY is around changing. Again, I use it with colleagues, is around kind of a lot of the time it's changing the direction of the oil tanker. So change can be slow. So I think I've learned resilience. I can be quite impatient, but I think certainly through the business, I think I've learned that resilience and that, to celebrate those small changes,
yeah,
and to try and, as I say, I think I've learned to kind of bring people along and learn how to articulate things in different ways to different
yes,
audiences. They might be saying the same thing, but a way to bring on board a developer, a contractor, an SME, a marketing, a finance, the messaging might be slightly different, and the way that we do that might be slightly different. So I think I've learned to be able to articulate it in a multiple,
brilliant.
lots of different ways.
Very valuable skill. That the ability to communicate and connect people together is so valuable, isn't it? In many ways. Um, and so looking forward then, Rob, what does the future look like for yourself and Chai, and what challenges do you think you might face, if any?
Well, I mean, the future, I mean, for Chai, we're, continuing to work with some really exciting projects. So we're working on York Central, which is the biggest urban regeneration project in the UK,
Oh, wow.
and we're continuing to work with kind of other clients from across the country. So continuing to work predominantly in the built environment still, and kind of we're looking to kind of particularly around sort of technology and innovation. I would say the future looks like, more associates, more people with specific skills. I think
Yeah,
as everyone's talking about the emergence of AI and all these sorts of things, and actually, working and sort of collaborating with people from different sectors about how we can use that within in the social value sector or the social impact
yeah,
sector, how we can benefit from some of those innovations. I think too often sectors will close the door to other sectors and they just look internally. And I think, we work with creatives and marketing firms and various others that we can learn from and adapt their technology or the way that they're doing things into our own. So hopefully some really exciting. I think the social impact of AI is an incredibly interesting subject.
yeah,
So that kind of what is the impact of all this of all this technology and what does that look like from a social value perspective? I think the challenge is, I think it's, I mean, I think the economy at the moment, I think making sure that we don't lose the sort of 2 decades of progress we've made in socially responsible
Yes.
procurement, and
Yeah.
the change from local authorities when they used to have economic growth strategies, they now have inclusive growth strategies.
Yeah.
And I think we forget that actually just the sheer change of language from economic development to inclusive economic development is a huge step in the right direction, but it's
Yes.
taken us a long time to get there. So I think as pressures come in, financial pressures, political pressures, I think keeping social value relevant and making sure that we don't lose sight of the progress that we've made.
Yeah. No, I can totally I understand that, and the will, it's likely we are going to see more economic pressure, I think, over the next couple of years, if just based on recent events. And as you say, that's therefore people like yourself championing what you do is going to be so important. And just in terms of any learning you might have, if you started a bit the business again, is there anything significant you do differently, do you think?
Um, I think we've been through various forms over the years. So we were a project within a charity, and then, and we were publicly financed, and then we moved to private sector finance. And so I think that CHY is always evolving. I think the only thing that maybe I would change is because we grew with the sector, we do lots and lots and lots of different things. There's not anything within social value that we kind of don't do, to be honest,
Yeah.
which is great as a USP. It's great because there's not really a challenge that you can come to us with that we haven't seen before or that we
Yeah.
haven't hopefully found a solution for. But I think if I did it again, I think I may sort of focus on particular, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But
Yeah.
focus on particular elements or sections of social impact and really, really become sort of specialized in those fields. That's the only thing. But actually, from a business perspective. From a personal perspective, I love being I suppose a jack of all trade. I love being able to do lots and lots of different things on a daily basis.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Final question. What would the best advice you could give an 18-year-old you if you could go back in time and do that too?
Say yes.
So yes, brilliant. That's a common thread, I think, from the conversation that we've had. So yes, absolutely. Wonderful. Rob, it's been fascinating talking to you, and I really appreciate your time. And I wish you all the best for the future. And hopefully, the economic conditions don't affect too much the great stuff you're doing. And for anyone that would like to get in touch with you or CHY Consultancy, what's the best way of doing that?
Well, you can go through our website, which is chyconsultancy.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, just as Rob Wolfe at CHY Consultancy. So I am on LinkedIn, and give me a call. We'll have a conversation. Always happy for a virtual or in-person coffee. So
Brilliant. Well, look, it'd be great to swing by another 6 to 12 months and just see how things are developing and what the next stage of the journey is. But for now, thank you so much for your time.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.